So was the Calvine craft an early version of one of these? It's interesting, it's segmented and diamond shaped, which is very reminiscent of the early stealth craft that were actually faceted. Today we have stealth craft that are rounded, and in fact these pseudo satellites are often tic-tac shaped or propane cylinder shaped, and they're very large. They need to be to have the buoyancy to carry some sensors and to be coated with metamaterial. Nick Cook, former aviation editor of Jane's Defence Weekly, shared the idea that Aurora was more likely a project name, not a single aircraft. And maybe why the Aurora project got funded is there was an emerging spy gap in available platforms at this time in the Cold War.
Well, as you know, Simon, no one has said anything officially about Aurora, but they have provided some clues. I asked General Milner about Aurora, and he started to obliquely describe a capability gap that existed between the SR-71 Blackbird, which was being retired in around 1990, and the coming online of a new generation of spy satellites, I think it was the KH-11 series, which had a real-time digital capability.
If something new was needed, the National Reconnaissance Office probably had a wish list for a new generation of spying platforms. The Aurora project might test flying higher, faster, unmanned, stealthier, and the ability to feed real-time digital data back to analysts. And some of these new features might well have been tested in UK airspace, simply because Britain is closer to potential targets and UK defence contractors make NATO's stealth materials. The obvious choice was to use RAF Machrihanish as a staging and refueling base. All good information from Nick that makes practical sense. But what about the Calvine sighting? Could it have been an exotic spy plane and part of the Aurora project?
To me, there is just a strong whiff of disinformation running right the way through it. And again, what we were saying earlier, Simon, I think applies to Calvin in that you have to look around at what was happening at the time of this purported sighting. As far as I recall, it was August 1990.
Yep.
And it was within days of Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. So whilst it could have been something up there, I don't dismiss that possibility. For me, the sort of the weird scrambled noise around the whole Calvin story is more redolent of some efforts to distract from something very real that was going on at the time. And if I could put money on what that was, that's much more likely to be something like Aurora, which may have been operating out of Machrihanish at that time, given that a staging post like the UK would have been needed to keep tabs on the movement of military hardware and military forces such as Saddam Hussein's at the time of the invasion of Kuwait. So I buy that explanation much more readily than I buy the sort of the UFO hype around the Calvin sighting, which is that it was the testing of something really weird and exotic and sort of anti-gravitational and stuff. So that's my hunch.
Nick's ideas are interesting, I agree. It could well just be misinformation, a leaked distraction from a new generation Aurora project aircraft that was secretly operational in 1990. Hey folks, welcome back. This is the part of my video where I was going to tell you about how the Calvine craft was more likely a buoyant drone. That's very much my theory, and I will go into that in a minute. But today, the beginning of October 2025, two new theories have emerged that I think are very intriguing. Now, I know David Clark won't like these, but it's good to have an open mind, I say. The first novel idea on Calvine that I'm going to discuss today comes from a long-time viewer and Patreon. He spent years researching whether it's just a rock in a lake, and he has new information. Just have a look at this, and this is very much aimed at Andrew at Sheffield Hallam University. Andrew and David, of course, have done excellent work on the whole Calvine case. Andrew is a photo specialist and has analysed what he can from this rather blurry photograph. Have you ever noticed this? They're very faint, but if you look at the top of the diamond, there appears to be three wee fronds emerging from the craft or the rock in the lake. So this viewer has gone up to Loch Aerospace to see the best triangular rock in the lake, and he says on top of the rock is growing some vegetation. Are the wee fronds new evidence that it's a rock in a lake? I think it exists as a theory, and I personally am going way further down the line of it's a real craft, not a UFO, but actually a secret military craft. But thank you for your amazing work to actually find this. And Andrew, what do you think? I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because the wee fronds are very blurry, but it definitely looks as if you contrast enhance the original blurry picture, that there's something coming out of the top of the diamond craft. Interesting. And the second new piece of information that was shared with me ties more into my theory that it was a Machrihanish-based craft, probably from the Aurora project, that was being tested in the Scottish low-level flight zone in Perthshire over the wee hamlet of Calvine. But that poses a big question that this new idea might help answer. Now, people have found, I really think, the location of the photograph on a hillside above Calvine. And if that's true, that's absolutely brilliant. The fence, the trees, the vegetation all look very similar. But how did the wee craft get from Machrihanish to Calvine? If it was some kind of exotic targeting or surveillance craft flown into Machrihanish, it's quite a wee way from Machrihanish to Calvine, and it would have, in a straight line, flown right over the centre of Glasgow. And these craft, that do exist, by the way, don't have forward mobility. They can do a little bit of station keeping, but they don't fly in a horizontal line very well. I suppose it could be towed. But what I've been told changes that whole story. Here's one possible scenario. Another annoying, bogus theory. No, it's quite good, this one. It flies into Machrihanish containerized. This is a segmented, deconstructed spying device. It's put in a container, driven up the A83, which is a military red road from Machrihanish to the Faslane area. It goes up the A83, takes a turn at Inverary, and follows the main road to this place. This is a British Government Forestry Commission paid road on the outskirts of Calvine. It's probably quite rough. I've no idea if it's good enough for a military vehicle. I suppose it might be. And it ends in a staging area, this kind of car park. The next part of the theory is very intriguing. In this staging area, which is in direct line of where the photograph was taken, the craft was reassembled. It's possibly, from Andrew's good work, between 20 and 40 meters. It's a big craft. And it's put together and tethered to a winch, right? And then it's hovered maybe 1,000 to 2,000 feet above the ground in sight of where the photograph was taken. Harriers fly up at the weekend from the only possible Harrier base at the weekend. That would be Wharton, owned by BAE at the time, who probably designed the metamaterial of the craft. Once they've established that the craft is airborne and tethered, it is then let go, or the tether is unspooled at very high speed, and these tethers at high speed do exist, and it disappears up into the wild blue yonder at a rate of knots because the craft is buoyant. And then later on, it's winched down or flown down whatever, put back in the container, taken back to Machrihanish, and this time flown to the Kuwait area, because it's a few days after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, and various governments want to have a long loitering system overlooking Kuwait to check what's going on. It's just another annoying theory, but it actually ties into a number of points that I'd like to make. So now let's go on and analyze whether the Calvine craft wasn't a rock in a lake, but possibly was part of the Aurora project. So was the Calvine sighting a newly developed black project aircraft, a novel type of spy platform that works better than anything preceding it? Let's explore those possibilities here today. If the Aurora name was actually a whole project, it would have developed multiple novel ideas to make observations of a target more effective. As Nick Cook stated, spy satellite oversights are very predictable, but hypersonic spy aircraft are far less predictable when they just appear over the horizon. But imagine if you could long loiter over a target, unseen, not in orbit, but as a pseudo-satellite, optically invisible and possessing uncanny radar stealth, with the ability, of course, to send real-time sensor data back home via a space asset. While researching this video for you, I've learned about something called liminal spaces. These are spaces that are kind of counterintuitive. Here's a good example. This is a map of our Earth, and notice that hurricanes are either in the southern hemisphere or the northern. They don't cross this so-called liminal space, this barrier which goes around the equator. Well, there's another one, and that's very, very interesting. There's a liminal space, an odd space between the stratosphere and the troposphere. And in that transition layer, similar to the hurricane equator map, it's quiet. It's absolutely calm, ideal for something floating. This unworldly space could be the ideal location for a novel, invisible spy satellite long loitering system. Possibly that's what the Calvine craft was, all the time a deeply secret part of the Aurora project. Hey folks, I won't get everything here correct. It's more about looking at the big picture of what might have gone on. Spy satellite data isn't really shared with a goat farmer here in France. So I value your military and engineering experience to correct anything that I F up on, right? Let's start with this concept, long loitering. How might it be possible to remain in a spy zone of interest for weeks or months? Reaper-type drones have reportedly around 3-day max durations and need a base within a 1,000-mile radius of the target. Amazing tech. But there might be a better way. Imagine a buoyant craft, built or coated with meta-stealth material, hovering in the sky and collecting real-time data for months. Long-duration spying lets you observe trends. This long-duration concept might well have been what the NRO finally settled on as their ideal Aurora spying platform. So today, has Aurora come true? Yes, today we have these pseudo-satellites invisibly monitoring military targets and major cities. They were hovering over Paris during the Olympics and almost certainly are unobserved over Gaza today. So how might they work? 1. To remain on target for months utilizes some very old and some very new science. Balloons can fly very high, they're difficult to see, but they drift in the wind unless you're in a liminal layer between the stratosphere and the troposphere. And let's turn the balloon idea on its head. These aren't balloons. Instead of filling an envelope with lighter than air gas, Imagine a structure made even more buoyant by being totally empty. A vacuum craft. Vacuum craft are counterintuitive, but are very real. By trapping a vacuum in a strong, lightweight metal foam called aeroloi, large floating platforms strong enough to resist crushing and able to carry sensors exist today. Don't take my word for it. Here are vacuum craft deployment requirements just issued by the DoD. In World War II, Japan exploited high-level winds called a jet stream to carry incendiary balloons across the Pacific. That led to finding this strange layer above the jet stream made of entirely calm air, a transition layer between the stratosphere and troposphere. It's almost at the edge of space. Imagine a radar-invisible craft held aloft at above 80,000 feet. It would make a very capable, long loitering spy platform. Its long-duration missions open up the possibility to use time-based media, giving analysts the ability to wind back the clock on targets, tracking bad actors through space and time. So was the Calvine craft an early version of one of these? It's interesting, it's segmented and diamond-shaped, which is very reminiscent of the early stealth craft that were actually faceted. Today we have stealth craft that are rounded, and in fact these pseudo-satellites are often tic-tac shaped or propane cylinder shaped, and they're very large. They need to be to have the buoyancy to carry some sensors and to be coated with metamaterial. They have to offset their mass of aeroloi and the sensors with the lift capabilities, the buoyancy of a vacuum craft. Today what we have, absolutely now, we have constant real-time surveillance from a system called Gorgon Stare, an AI system that can answer very hard questions, finding where we were and predicting where we might go. That's the world we live in, capable but scary. What do you think? Was the Calvine craft a reflecting rock in a lake, a piece of disinformation, or possibly an early iteration of a segmented diamond stealth surveillance craft flown into Machrihanish, transported by truck, reassembled and flown in the Scottish Highland Flight Test Area with Harriers from BAE Wharton? Bit of a long stretch, or possibly just true. And let's not underestimate the role of RAF Machrihanish in all this, hiding in plain sight. So firstly, folks, thanks for watching. Please press like now if what you heard here was at least intriguing. And as always, share what you can to move this story forward. Because of you, the truth can be out there.